Friday. This is Kirsten McGregor from Zagex Associates going live on LinkedIn and a few other platforms. It's SEDS week, so of course I had to finally get back online and do a video on SEDS. For those who don't know what that is, it's an acronym for Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. And when people talk about it, it's usually the plan that's funded by the U.S. Economic Development Administration. However, there are several SEDS for municipalities and regions and states that aren't necessarily approved by or funded by EDA. So I just wanted to go through some of the sections for people that are pretty standard for this plan, but most economic plans in general should probably incorporate this. So first is the background, the baseline. So looking at all those other plans and strategies that are going on. This is particularly important since you want to make sure that you're not conflicting with other policies and recommendations that are related. So including transportation, rural development, housing, and so on. The next section is data and demographics. So that could be looking at data over time and or data throughout the region, or benchmarking comparing to other places in the country, location quotients. There's a lot of different ways you can go about it. It just depends how deep you want to go. And I suggest having a summary of this and then having the data at the end, but we'll talk about format in a second. The next thing that relates to the data is the stakeholder engagement. And so I've mentioned this before, that that's the most important part of a plan, is that strong stakeholder engagement. So ensuring that you have a diverse participation, whether that be across the region from different types of organizations, urban versus rural, and also just the makeup of the people themselves. But certainly you want to have that private sector involvement. The strategic engagement can be a number of methods. It could be a task force that they've set up, different subcommittees based on industries or areas. It can be a core committee that you meet with on a regular basis. It can also be a survey that you put out either once or multiple times, depending on your approach. It can be focus groups, and those could be hybrid. They can be in person and online. Large public meetings for engagement that way, requesting feedback through emails and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of ways that you can get that information. The other thing I've done recently that hadn't done in a while was having subject matter expert interviews from the region that we're working with on a SEDS on the particular focus areas that we had determined to focus on with the SEDS. So that helped a lot to get that nuanced context. Then when the next section is the SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think everybody does this a little bit differently, but I tend to base that off of the information that was gathered from the other plans and strategies that we looked at with the background, the data assessment that we've done from a variety of different data sources, whether that's public or private, or whether it's real estate data, whether it's housing data, that informs, but also those leading practices, like what's going on across the country from the federal level, state level, and communities with how leading practices with how they're looking at economic development strategies. And so once you're done with the SWOT, which again, I think it's good to have like a one-pager and then have a more detailed SWOT in your appendix. Again, we'll get to format in a second. But then you start getting into your strategic objectives. So these are basically your preliminary recommendations of how and goals and how you want to approach from a higher level moving forward based on the feedback you've received on all the previous sections that we just talked about. And then the next section, which can kind of be combined with the other one depending on how you do it, is the action plan. So that basically builds out a roadmap for your priority objectives. So who's going to own it? Who are the partners and stakeholders who are going to be a part of that? Sometimes you might want to put what that funding sources could be, how much would it cost, depending on what that objective is, what's the timeline, and I like to include this section, the evaluation framework, which is where you look at how are you going to look at measure the progress over time. So defining metrics, and sometimes they're out of the control of the organization. They're like GDP is, but it definitely shows the progress if it's going in the direction that was anticipated. So typically 1 to 5 years with that, but it could be as simple as if an objective is have these two organizations have a strategic collaboration plan. Obviously, the evaluation metrics are going to be much simpler. So then you need to figure out, okay, how are you going to present this? And the trend now is having shorter documents with a lot of the policy type information, a lot of the data, the detailed stakeholder engagement summary, the detailed data summary in the appendix. But having those summarized, having those key takeaway data points, having the summary of all the different groups that you talk to from a very high level in the document. So, but keep in mind who your audience is, and that will help you figure out and determine what that format looks like. I also strongly suggest you format it in a way that can be easily transferred to like a website, like a digital SEDS concept. That's because that tends to be more user friendly and engaging. Another thing to think about are those things for accessibility. So if it can be translated into another language on your website, if you do have a high percentage of a Spanish speaking population, for example, you might want to have a PDF prepared in Spanish. Another thing is having a slide deck, which is another way of having an executive summary of this shorter document. So those 200-page documents, they still have their place. I'm an urban planner by training, so of course I respect that. But I think when we're trying to get elected officials, business owners, whether they're small business owners, and just the community in general to work with and reference the document and have it be a living, breathing document that is actually a resource, then it's going to have to be formatted in a way that's visually pleasing, organized in a way that's simple and to the point, unlike this video, and sort of flow. So that's why the website type version of rather than just a PDF is nice for a lot of audiences. So it said speak, so I had to say something before the end of the week. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please reach out to me if you have any other questions. Thanks so much.